I think I recognize all the names here, but just as a reminder, our culture is we try to make it be a positive experience for everyone who's here. These meetings are potentially open to anyone who wants to attend. Every member is welcome. Every project meeting our criteria is welcome. This is covered by the antitrust policy, but since I believe I recognize all the names here, I trust that you're all familiar with this. Trust, haha, antitrust, okay. The agenda is the same as was posted, with a modification being point number 5 is added back in. This is, and I believe, Brandon, you are the presenter for this one here. And so I put that in after Ava's discussion point and before the TAC white paper, and so we'll get to that. Other than that, are there any other changes to the agenda? We will probably have to reorder voting items until the second half approval of minutes, unless we happen to have quorum here. We'll find out in just a second here, since there's a voting member or two that are joining about halfway through. Okay, hearing nothing, then we will go in that order, other than approval of minutes may be moved down. So let's go ahead and start with our roll call here. So Accenture, I see Giuseppe here. Ant, I do not see Zongmin currently. ARM, I see Michael, are you?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
I'm Grant is on holiday, so I'm here as the
Okay.
stand-in.
Great. And then Shankaran, I see you're representing Facebook today.
Yeah.
Okay. And Brandon is here.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Or whatever time zone you're in. Let's see. Howard, I don't see Howard here. Simon is one of those that will be late. I'm here, and Dimitrios is the other one that will be a little bit late. And so I count we have 5, so we already have quorum, even without Simon or Dimitrios. So that means we do not need to defer minutes. Thank you all for being here. So we have 2 sets of minutes on deck. The first one, since we did not get, since we deferred it from last meeting, since we didn't really have quorum during times that we had to call a vote last time on September 17th. Is there anybody that needs more time to review September 17th's minutes, which was, what, 4 weeks ago? And if not, is there any of the 5 voting members that would vote no or abstain? Pausing for a second. Anybody that would need to abstain from those minutes? If not, then we will consider the September 17th minutes approved. And that then leads us to the minutes from last time, October 1st. Is there anybody that needs more time to review the 2 minutes from 2 minutes ago before casting a vote? And hearing nothing, is there anybody that would vote no, meaning you have amendments that are necessary, or abstain, maybe because you weren't there or haven't read it? And if I hear nothing, then I will consider those passed as well. Okay, let's go ahead and move on then. I'm going to move into, well, maybe not. Okay, here's a list of, we had a bunch of action items, many of which are done, but they wouldn't fit on one slide. And so I put all the non-white paper specific action items on this slide, and anything specific to the white paper on the slide about the white paper. So let's walk through these. Since Mike is not here, I'm going to skip over number 1. Number 2 is the Keystone action item. Anything there that you know to report, Stefano?
Nothing to report, but I will be in contact with David for other items as well as this. So hopefully I should hear back sometime in the next week.
Okay, great. Anything on point 3?
So that's very much still in process.
Okay.
But yeah, still working on that.
All right, number 4 I saw is done. This was when the Oclam Oclam project was presented to the TAC. The dependencies weren't clear as to which ones were in the TCP and which ones were out, and so we asked them to update that. And Stefano just a little while ago got the updated version, and so that's, I don't know if you can see it on the screen. They've updated their document here, which I have not reviewed yet since it just came in, but this is the answer to that question. And so I don't know that there's nobody on the call that's from Auckland, correct? Okay, so The link is here in the slides, and I think it was posted out to all of the TAC, correct, Stefano? Is an email notification?
You know what? It might have been, but let me go ahead and send it to the TAC just to be sure.
Okay.
And then just so folks know, that table there is the same table. They just called out specifically which items are hashed in the TCB.
So the TAC can review it. We've technically already gone through the TAC vote, but we asked them to provide us this other information. And unless there's anything that would change our opinions or whatever, there's nothing that we need to go back to a vote. But this is one that we should verify that they all look good. So, any other comments or questions on that one? Otherwise, I'm going to mark that one as done here. Okay. The next one, I'm just going to ask Ava, have you and Mike had a chance to talk any more about the terminology proposal? If not, we'll just keep that on.
We had a chance to talk. Nothing significant has changed. Mike did add some new wording to the doc. We've got some more conversations to have.
Okay. Yep, we'll keep that on there, and when you're ready to bring it back, we'll have it be a regular agenda item.
Sounds good.
The next one I had presented before what the board voted on regarding voting and so on, and there's an action item on me to generate a pull request to update the project progression policy as a result of the board charter change. I have now done that, so you'll see that at the very end, just on the list of open pull requests. I saw Mike already approved it, and so it's the time bomb has started. I think this one.
Stephen is not here, but he has reached out to Kat. We haven't heard back yet.
Okay.
So still waiting.
Thank you for the report. So should we keep this on here for next time then, is what I take it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Stefano, you want to talk about the last two? Any updates?
Yes. There is a timing diagram graphic. I will send it to the list. And we can make number 9 in progress.
I just realized that number 8 I should have put on the TAC white paper because this is related to TAC white paper. So technically it's on the wrong slide. But
right.
Okay.
And actually, they'll provide us with an SVG, so we could use it for anything if we have other uses for that timing diagram.
Okay, cool. And then tell me more. Number 9, what is it that's in progress? Being the LF or setting up the vote?
No, setting up the vote.
Okay.
The LF responded that yes, indeed, Slack is their current chat platform of choice.
Okay. So this last part here, I can cross off that and just keep the first part.
Correct.
Okay, got it. And so when do you expect to, do you have any guesses? Will we see the vote in between now and OSS? Do we want the vote to try to close before or after OSS?
No, I would say we should do the vote before. Actually, I guess we're all going to use Slack at Open Source Summit. So maybe it would be a good opportunity for some folks who haven't used Slack to give it a try. And then after Open Source Summit, we can decide what would we like to use for our systems.
So would you like to start the vote before then, but have the vote conclude after that?
Yeah, sure, that'll work.
Anyone else have concerns? So what if we have the vote conclude on, I don't know, the Friday or the Monday after OSS?
Yeah, that'll work.
So that we can talk about it, because I think what our next meeting, it would be, normally our next TAC meeting would be the 29th, which is during OSS. So I should put that under any other business to figure out when our next meeting is. So I don't forget that. Let me just add a note here, and then next meeting. Okay. Okay. Then let's go on to the next point. So the next point is Ava. I'll let you introduce this one. The outreach already had a discussion here, but go ahead and kick it off, Ava.
Sure. So as I mentioned a little while back to the TAC with the terminology discussions, a couple projects in the CNCF had also reached out and chatted with me about their own curiosity in using hardware enclaves and lack of consistent terminology. So I was invited to brief the CNCF SIG security on confidential computing. I shared the outreach white paper. I shared the TAC's scoping document. We had a great discussion. Several projects had representatives in the meeting, so we identified a sort of initial list. One of the leaders of that SIG has offered to do a survey of CNCF projects to identify sort of a larger set of folks who are interested in using or already trying to find ways to use hardware enclaves inside various projects in the CNCF that may turn into a subgroup of that SIG to define common use cases or scenarios. Unsure right now what that's going to turn into. And that SIG is also creating a white paper for security in CNCF projects. That is targeted to KubeCon, which is mid-November. They said they'd love to have confidential computing included in that in the next draft. There's just no time to get it in right now. Once that work starts, I'll try to coordinate with Outreach to make sure that similar content or and depending on the depth of that white paper, it might make sense to connect it here to the tax white paper. Don't know yet because I haven't seen their draft. That's most of my update, just to say, hey, that stuff's in progress. And if folks are interested in either joining discussions on the CNCF side or would like a regular report back here in the TAC as I track that work over the next several months, let me know. Happy to help.
So one of our topics that we teed up last time that's not later on the agenda is, cross-org coordination. What is the CNCF's precedent for how they prefer to work with other open source related organizations? Like, do they have a notion of a liaison? Do they have any particular process that they like to follow for coordination?
To my understanding, they like to have a liaison and they work through these SIGs. So the CNCF TOC, equivalent to our TAC, empowers a special interest group with a given purview, a charter. That SIG then establishes its own work streams, subcommittees, meetings, minutes, etc. And so this SIG security seems to be a good place, at least for now, to coordinate discussions within the CNCF around hardware enclaves. And they would, we haven't figured out exactly what that work will look like going forward yet. This was just the initial, hey, are you interested in this? Is this the right place to have this conversation? And considering that a good conversation was had, folks generally agreed that, yeah, they'd like to continue having conversations in SIG security in some form or other.
Great. So let me ask another variation of my question. In standards bodies, their process for coordination is perhaps relatively heavyweight in the sense that standards bodies are used to having a person that's appointed as a liaison in each direction. And so let's say you were talking about standards org A and standards org B, you typically have a liaison from A appointed to represent A to B and vice versa. So there would be two different people typically as liaisons that would be appointed. I don't know if the thing is that, or if it's just, hey, you got a person that's participating in both and sharing information and they don't need a designation or what. So
I don't believe it is as formal as you're describing regarding bidirectional liaisons.
Yeah. So just having a person in common like yourself that is sharing information back and forth is the normal expectation, is what I'm hearing.
That's my understanding today.
Okay.
And I'm happy to be that person. I plan on doing that in the CNCF SIG anyway. I'm happy to report here on an ongoing basis of the progress over there.
Okay. Since we don't have a CCC process, I was asking for a precedent here. So I guess the default action is that you're the go-between and sharing information back in both directions. Unless somebody else wants to step up that's also participating in both of those, then I think by default it's you, unless anybody has concerns or other suggestions. Thank you for doing this, and we appreciate the report, and I'd love to see more coordination. So the notion of the white paper being referenced and coordination back and forth is great stuff. So
absolutely. I did see a hand go up.
Okay, I didn't. Who is it?
Oh, I just put it down. I was curious if there was like a short characterization you could make of their use cases or their interest in using confidential compute?
I can give a couple examples. Since we haven't created a list of use cases yet, I can only speak of individual projects who spoke up during that meeting or reached out to me in parallel. Kubernetes, obviously, for launching things like confidential containers or using DEEs inside a Kubernetes instance. But then some of the less obvious ones might be in Toto or TUF, the update framework. That is a project for software supply chain management. They're interested in using hardware ID to do signed builds that can be traced back to which machine did the build. Open Policy Agent is looking at ways to do orchestration of key release. Network Service Mesh or Open Service Mesh, those are two different projects that do kind of the same thing. Both are looking at mutual TLS. So as soon as folks are launching enclaves or workloads in enclaves in a cloud native environment, those two projects have said they would love to have a consistent way to do network service, to do mutual TLS. There were two reps from OCI, Open Container Initiative there, who recently, I think back in July, published a spec for encrypted container images that are both interested in knowing that whoever's launching containers into enclaves might follow the same encrypted container spec that they wrote so that it's compatible with things. That was the initial discussions of interest.
That's great. That's really interesting to hear those. Thank you for those examples.
Welcome.
Hey, anyone else have questions on Ava or comment stories? All right, good work. We look forward to hearing more. All right, so I'm gonna move on to the next topic, hearing silence. Next topic, this was a issue that was brought up to the board a while back by Claude, and I believe, Brandon, you're gonna, so the board basically referred it to the TAC. And so I think we're gonna have the same or similar discussion right now. So Brandon, you wanna take over? Brandon, can you confirm you have audio?
Hey there, folks,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we wanted to suggest this idea around creating a working group within the TAC to focus on aspects of attestation and interoperability of attestation. Really, the goals of this working group would be to explore what solutions exist today within the open source community and within various different libraries that different open source projects are using, to make a recommendation around how we could standardize on some common frameworks for authentication and authorization through attestation. The goals here would not be to create a new standard. This is not intended to be sort of an RFC type thing. This is really more about us putting together a small group, a subset group, whoever's interested within the TAC, or nominating people within their companies who would be technical experts in this area to get together on a regular basis and do that exploration, and then come back with recommendations to the TAC, to the governing committee, around what we would have as recommendations here. So it's kind of the general idea. I think we should work through kind of how we would want to form the working group, what that structure would look like. If we, think that this is a good idea, we would definitely send out some of the more detailed ideas that we have here. We've got a 2-pager that we're working on that we can send out for comments and discussion, and for folks here within the TAC to put the ideas in around, what exactly that scope and charter would look like, what the outcomes would be that we want to see here, and so kind of go forward from there. So really, the intention here today is just to propose this as an idea, solicit feedback if people think this is something that would be worthwhile to do, and then sort of go forward and then we'll send that two-pager out, get those comments, and then at the next TAC meeting, we could discuss in greater details as we've had a chance to go back and forth a bit in the doc. So with that sort of general introduction, open up for questions or comments.
Anybody else have comments or questions? Otherwise, I have one or two, but if somebody else has some, then please go ahead. Okay, hearing nothing, I guess I'll give a comment or question or two. Sounds like your proposal is specific to attestation, at least for the initial proposal. And so I guess next time around, we can call it something like, attestation project or attestation SIG proposal or whatever. Is that correct? My assumption?
It is. That's correct. Yes. And I think that around attestation, there are a lot of a range of possible topics that we could be working on and discussing. Mm-hmm. Do we want to structure this as sort of we're discussing here? Yeah. As the charter for the working group would be solely around attestation as a primary means of interop, or would we want to extend that charter to include things like data formats or other forms of interop that would come up around code reuse, for example? That's a great open question. I think our intention really was to take the problem of attestation and external representation of trust verification, identity verification that we tie into authentication and authorization. That seems like that's a big enough, heady enough problem to really focus this around. But if we're creating a working group, do we want to give it a little bit more charter, a little bit more runway to be sustainable past the topic just of attestation? I think that's a fine question. I think that's one would definitely like to hear other thoughts or comments on.
So my second comment or question was just going to be that we've created this attestation at list.confidentialmeeting.io list, which seems like there's some overlap. And so what I'm wondering is, if we were to create a SIG or whatever we would call it, would we just adopt that particular mailing list as the mailing list for the SIG, or do we think that the scope or intent is different enough that the set of members of that list would be different? Mm-hmm. I guess the people who were involved in the creation of that, which I guess would be Mike and Simon and myself, the other two are not here, and so I imagine that Mike Purcell and Simon Johnson might have comments there. But what does the rest of the TAC think? Is that from what you know of that, and a number of you have actually joined that attestation at list, which the intent there was for people to share learnings and discussion about attestation, how attestation works on different processors, and how to have code to make use of the attestation capabilities, and even have code that would be shared across projects, right? That's how I would frame what that list was created for, which sounds to be significant overlap with what you're talking about. And so it might be that this is saying, hey, let's take that list and sort of formalize it or empower it as a SIG in some sense, and put more charter or scope or something into it. Would be one way to frame a proposal. So
Dave, can you talk a little bit more about this mailing list? I don't think it's been announced before.
It has. It was in the TAC meeting slides from I think 2 meetings ago, and posted to I think it was posted to the TAC list. But it is open to anybody to join. It was originally generated, I'm just going to repeat roughly what would be in the minutes from something like 2 meetings ago. I'm getting a feedback here. I got to wait for a second. Okay. So there was an initial meeting between projects, which I believe included representatives of NARC's, Open Enclave, and I think the Intel SGX SDK for Linux, I think was in that meeting, but I can't remember for sure, but I had the impression that they were. And so it was specifically just a cross-product meeting that was set up by the mentors because there was projects that had questions for their projects. How did you do stuff? Could we share code? Could we factor stuff out such as a common library that can be, consumed by these multiple projects. And so that was what this sort of one-off meeting was that was scheduled by the project mentors, meaning, Mike and me and I think Simon, that's the part I'm fuzzy on. Because it was all about specifically the use case and the discussion centered around, how Intel's SGX processor worked and whether you could have attestation code that was in common between, say, Open Enclave and NARCs that was using the Intel SGX attestation scheme and so on. And so as a result of that, we said, well, we should set up this mailing list, and it's not just for these 2 projects or whatever. There's other projects that probably want the same thing. And so we brought that back to the TAC that Mike and I reported out that we had this meeting. We asked Stefano to set up this list and that any other projects were welcome to join this particular mailing list, because this is where we're going to have some implementation discussion that might be initially about Intel SGX, but it was by no means intended to be only about Intel SGX, since neither of those projects, NARCs or Open Enclave, are SGX only. That the expectation is that with the same projects, we'd want to be collaborating about processors other than SGX and how to have shared code and things. And so that's where the origin of the list came from. We reported this out, Mike and I reported it out at a TAC meeting and said, hey, you're all welcome to join. It's different from sort of the CCC TAC list because it's specific to code and implementers, right? And so you don't have to be a TAC member or whatever, but if you talk about how do I code stuff in C or what's the API for such and such, this is a list. And so that's what we had created and reported out then. That sounds to be a lot like what, Brandon, you're proposing here for attestation, other than maybe more formal and more scope and so on. And so not knowing what Mike or Simon would say, I might suggest that this become that mailing list and the effort that you're talking about here be merged into something that is part of the same thing. But I see, Ava, you have your hand up, so go ahead.
I think I had a question earlier that has now passed.
Okay.
I do have a
Thanks.
comment.
So, Stefano, can you send out details on the mailing list, on the TAC mailing list?
Sure, will do.
Go ahead, Michael.
It's Michael from, I do have a comment on this.
Yeah, please.
So I think that we do need a more formal working group. I do think that the mailing list is a mechanism for that working group to discuss and meet and collaborate. I do think, however, that it's a statement of intent that this is an area of importance for quite a lot of people. And I think given that quite a lot of people who are stakeholders in seeing this attestation subgroup, who isn't here this meeting, can we defer the discussion and the setting up and the charter and the scope and the mechanism as an agenda for next meeting in 2 weeks' time?
Yeah, that's what I heard, Brandon. You said you were going to have a document. You're teeing it up now, and you wanted this to be on the agenda for next meeting after people could review the document. Is that?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and I agree as Michael is presenting that, right? We have the mailing list set up. That would be a mechanism for facilitating communication. But really what this proposal here, the suggestion I'm making today is indeed about formalizing this actually as a working group with defined membership, defined success criteria, scope, outcomes, and goals. So it is adding a little bit more formalism around that. And it also is adding a little bit of some accountability for ourselves, say back to the governing committee around about those recommendations and about those outcomes.
I think all of that is good, and I would like to ask for a little clarification. Is the interoperability scoped within CCC projects, or is the goal interoperability with other existing standards or widely adopted projects outside of the CCC?
Yeah, and there are things like the TCG has a trusted authentication protocol. IATF has this remote attestations group, the RATs. And so I think one of the goals or outcomes here from the working group would be to examine those standards and see if those are things that we might want to make a recommendation around direction for. And so I think that would definitely be one of the questions we'd want this working group to answer.
In that case, may I suggest you consider scoping this to attestation interoperability, because trying to take on interoperability for everything that we do also, like, that's a much broader topic because of,
Yeah, as Microsoft's TAC rep, now moving in different hat here, Microsoft TAC rep, yes, I agree. Both with Brandon's point about not just CCC projects per se, although depending on how you define that, CCC projects may have the other protocols that Brandon mentioned, or even support for proprietary non-standard things like Intel's attestation mechanism, or ARM's current attestation mechanism, or whoever else's current attestation mechanism that might not be a standard. I think all of those, what I'm hearing is, I think those would be fine for it to be in scope. So I think, and I also feel obligated to point out that although I asked the question about the mailing list, right, we still have that separate topic where mailing lists are not sufficient. And so such and such a SIG, if we created it, might also have a, cross-project Slack channel or whatever else. That's that other discussion that we've been having. So a mailing list is a mechanism, but it is not the mechanism. I just wanted to point that out. So.
There was a question at the very beginning whether the SIG should be narrowly or broadly scoped. I think it should be narrowly scoped, and we can always create more SIGs or change the scope of a SIG later on if we feel that's warranted.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, great. And who was that just commented?
That was Jethro.
Jethro. Okay, great.
So it sounds like you're hearing support for, yeah, please go ahead and write it up for review for next time that we meet, and scope it narrowly to specifically about attestation. Right.
Yeah, and I see in the comments that Dan also is another +1 on sort of the scoping and having that be more narrowly focused. So I heard from Ava and from Jethro and Dan around that. So that's a helpful input and feedback. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on this that hasn't spoken up yet? Okay. Any other questions for the TAC, Brandon? Otherwise, it sounds like you have some useful feedback here for.
I do, and we have a little bit more work, and so we'll be sending out that 2-pager in time for us to have some discussion comments there, and then we'll follow back up then at the next TAC meeting in 2 weeks on that in greater detail.
In 2 weeks, or whatever it is that we decide on our last action item here. So.
Absolutely. Okay, great.
We will decide whether it's in 2 weeks or some other time at the end of the call. So depending on, you may or may not have more time than that. We'll see.
Okay, fine, fantastic.
All right, thanks, Brandon. All right,
thank you, everyone.
Any other comments on that one? Otherwise, we'll move on to our next topic. Okay. Next topic is the TAC white paper. I'll first refresh our memory with the 3 action items here, plus I guess the one that was up top, which was the one with the graphic. So here the 3 action items were Thomas Harjono suggested adding a sentence in the introduction section about the intended audience. We haven't done anything about that one in the outreach meeting. I brought this up yesterday in the outreach meeting to ask, does the because you might ask the same question about the outreach white paper, and what did the outreach white paper do? And Seth, I see you're on here. You want to re-summarize your answer there? Otherwise, I can. But
yeah, I think the answer was we discussed it in the development of the white paper, but did not document it as a written part of the white paper. So we would be open to doing that if the TAC white paper had it and we felt it was important, but it doesn't have it now.
So it's useful data point that the outreach white paper shipped without this, even though they may still want it. It's also worth reminding us that the outreach white paper had an initial version for last OSS and an updated version for this OSS. And so we could do the same thing in the TAC that said, even if the initial version didn't do this, we could point it to the next version and still address it there. It would not be that much different from what outreach did, is just the point there. And so
I think the other thing that came up in discussion was that we would change some of the references and maybe put a call to action to read the TAC white paper for more technical content.
Yep.
So that was the other part of the discussion.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll go into the actual TAC white paper text in a moment here. I'm just going through the actual items, but yes. So the next one, I think this one is done. Yeah, this one is actually done. So I can mark that one off because Mike has done that one in the text. And then Michael, as a reminder, you're going to have somebody from ARM attestation review the document before today. So I don't know if you want me to cross that one off.
So I have got a few comments back from our attestation lead, Simon Frost. So 3 comments. Unfortunately, they're not in the white paper, so I need to add them in. So just for, and they are, the side channel chapters is too heavily biased towards physical attacks. And secondly, the attestation section tries to go into, again, quite a lot of detail, which is very implementation specific. And that the DAA, as described, is not the only means by which privacy can be addressed for attestation, which has got different use cases, whether it is identification of a device, whether it is the surveillance of certain activities. So there are different viable approaches depending on what that specific deployment or use case is. Those are the comments that I think I may need to put in. They're not in at the moment.
Right.
I only got them today. In fact, yesterday. Sorry.
Gotcha. So on the first one, yeah, please edit a comment because I don't think there's any changes there. All I've done here is you can see, last time we had we talked about a bunch of things that were change tracked last time, and anything that somebody did not raise during the last meeting as a disagreement, I went ahead and accepted the changes that were posted as suggestions before last meeting. There's a couple of them that are still in here because we were having discussions on them, and otherwise there's new text changes in here. So everything that's a change track in the document now is either things that are new since last meeting or things that were not closed during last meeting. So I wanted to point out that last meeting we had a discussion on the direct anonymous attestation. I'm looking for where that section is here.
Yep.
I don't remember what number it is. So
you had to go down a bit more.
Yeah.
Yep.
There, yeah. So we had a discussion that said, there was too much text, and we said last time that we were going to move stuff to the copy graveyard, and so that part there is moved down to the copy graveyard. And so now what's left in the direct anonymous is this text here, which I will let you briefly read through, Michael, to see if this would address, because now it references, so it still kept the reference to the IEC document as an EG. And so now it just says one approach, which is kind of some edits that we did during the meeting last time. So it's still called out, but it's called out as an example. It's not called out as a, we're trying to endorse DAA at the expense of other ones. We're just saying, hey, DAA is one that's talked about in the ISO document, and that's an example. And there's different ways of doing it, and so on. So that was, I think, matching, and so that's why it's still change tracked, right? Because this is new since last meeting to address the discussion from last time. So the discussion was, hey, that was too much to be in this particular document, so we're going to move that to a different document or something. So this was the resolution of that. My hope is that this would address your second comment, but if not, please suggest text.
Okay, so leave that with me. Leave that with me, because anonymity, I think, is the, if that's the property that's desired, then I think that's a suitable approach, because the text here is very generic. With the right cryptography, you can do anything, right? It doesn't really describe. Yeah, so leave that with me. I'll add comments over the next few days, ready for next time.
So there's a timing issue, which is that since the Open Source Summit is just under 2 weeks from now, meaning we're in the middle of the week, I think it starts on Monday or Tuesday 2 weeks from now, and continues on through, I think, today, 2 weeks from now, the Thursday. The timeline is that if we want to have something out before the Open Source Summit, we need to send it to LF at least to get started on it by the end of this week, because they need a week of lead time. we could still make changes that they then have to incorporate into there, but like not moving sections around or something major, but we can do wordsmithing and stuff. And so the hope was that by Friday or whatever, wordsmiths would be down into just the wordsmithing stages, and we could send it to LF by by tomorrow. And so if there's going to be major comments, and the really question is it going to be major enough that we need to hold it, or is it enough that we could do it in a second version after OSS? So if you remember, Outreach had some comments that were still open, and they deferred it until afterwards, which was like the blockchain section was kept out and then added in after the OSS is in the second round. So we could do something like that. But really, I would ask you, is there anything that would prevent us from having the LF start doing their pass starting, end of week, meaning, end of day tomorrow or whatever, we could send it to LF Foundation to say, hey, you can start your editing pass. We may still do some wordsmiths throughout the next week or so, but we'd have to do that over email or in a special meeting or whatever it is that we would decide.
Sure. So looking through the comments again, I mean, the specific comments are some of the attestation details are too detailed and very implementation specific. And that I don't think it's a general comment. It's not a comment to take anything whole sections out. So I think that's okay.
Yeah. I have already made a pass, I think, in the attestation section in particular, but I thought your first point was in the side channel section.
The side channel section also is that it's very hardware based.
Yeah.
It is
this
very, and unfortunately, I do not think we want to contribute additional text into other threads at this point. I don't think we are going to do that at this point. So I think that's the only bit that may need some changes. I do not know what those changes are at the moment. So let me try and get back to you by tomorrow. Okay. So that would be by tomorrow morning, our time, which would be, so you will have, hopefully, if you have nothing, then go ahead. If there is additional comments, then I'll have something for you in terms of either comments or suggested edits tomorrow morning your time.
Suggested edits being the most preferred, absolutely. If you can do suggested edits, that would be best, but do what you can,
And the third thing is that given that Hannes is also on the call, can I just ask, Hannes, have you got any comments on your side?
Yeah, I'm a little bit behind on my to-do list, but a review of the document is something that I definitely want to do. And from what I've heard so far, I have to do that sooner rather than later.
Well, if you want it to be in the version that we would try to post for the open source summit.
Yeah, of course that would be useful, I guess.
Yeah. The attestation section, on the other hand, I've done a pass. You can see my edits here. I had done one pass that was before the meeting last time that we talked about. And so like Simon had a comment that says, well, we should explain where the terms came from. And you can see I've added the sentence here saying these terms are used consistent with the IETF's RATS architecture. And there's the reference here, which we're already referring to, is just referred to later on in the document. And so I tried to make a second pass through this time. To make sure that it is clear that, to try to make it be as agnostic as possible. And so it does talk about, as we did last time, this is an example here, because there's other variations here. And, for a longer discussion of other variations, see, and this is where it was referenced before, and I just moved it up. And so it's still referencing here for their variations. So my intent here was to update this. So this was, hardware agnostic and protocol agnostic and stuff, but it was still use an example as, I think this was it Jinjin section that put this together? I forget. Whoever wrote this, it was a good example. We've cleaned up the language and stuff, but my hope is that this is agnostic, but if you have other changes or other comments on this, please feel free if you think it needs more work.
Dave, one kind of general comment that's not a specific change, but when we did the outreach white paper, one of the things I did was I did a document review with the lead analyst from Gartner, Steve Riley. And you don't need to do that necessarily at any particular point, but that was one of the ways in which we were able to influence the definition of the category. So it might be useful to do that after you publish the first version and maybe incorporate, you know, if he has any suggested changes that are make sense to you. So, and the mechanics for doing that is you submit the document as like for a document review, and then you have like a 30-minute meeting with him. So I'd encourage you to do that if you can do that. If not, I could do it and kind of relay the information. So think about that. I wouldn't suggest holding it for the first version, but it might be a good thing to do for the second version.
Anyone else have thoughts on that?
I do like the idea, and I think that we got useful feedback when we did the analyst briefing earlier in the year, as well as helping to continue that relationship. So I think this is an excellent idea. The timing of it, I think that we'll probably be coming in a little hot to get this first deadline in, and so we would definitely want to try to schedule and queue that up for some time after the initial release.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting is, you know, once you finalize V1 and we use it at Open Source Summit, send V1 to Steve Riley and set up a document review for like 2 or 3 weeks later, something like that.
Yeah, I like that.
The one catch is that the person who sets up the meeting and does the document review has to have a Gartner seat. So it can't just be anybody. So I can, that's why I, you know, if Dave, if you can do it, you know, through Microsoft's seat, that would be good, or someone else who's familiar with the white paper. Otherwise, I would just have to kind of take notes on what his comments are.
Is that something that only the person with the seat can be in that meeting, or that you can have another invited guest?
Technically, it's only supposed to be the person with the seat, but I can try, like they sometimes bend the rules, so I can ask. That would be the optimal scenario, I think.
Okay.
So I can try for that.
Yeah, because it sounds like if it's possible, it would be great if both you and I could be there, but I don't know if that's actually logistically.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, I don't need to be there. It would just be to use my Gartner seat, but.
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
Okay, I will try for that. So just keep that note. Let me know when you want to do that. I'll try to do that.
Okay. But yeah. So it sounds like people think that that's a good idea. At least I hear support from Brandon, and I think it's okay. Unless anybody else has any comments or concerns, then we can try to make that happen after the OSS.
And for the outreach paper, the changes he had were minimal. I mean, he felt strongly about some of them, but they were not like foundational changes to the white paper.
Yeah, I mean, I think this white paper, that the TAC white paper, should be reviewed by, you know, we should accept input from anybody. I mean, that's why I love input from anything that comes from, you know, IETF or FIDO or whatever else, because, or, you know, homomorphic encryption people, you know, whatever, because we want it to be recognized as a technically sound document in any community. So I'll take feedback anywhere we can get it.
And one of the things that this also is, we're sort of referencing the fact that we would have multiple versions of this doc, which I think is right, given that the topics here are fairly vast and could be covered in a wide variety of detail. And some of the things actually will evolve and change over time. And so, you know, we'll just need to make sure that we're clear about how we version this document. And then when we do revise this as a published version change, how we track that within the document or in some other mechanism. I don't know if we discussed that process yet, or
no. And since outreach is a little bit ahead in their white paper going to V2, let me first ask Seth, have you discussed that in outreach, and how do you track version numbers of the outreach white paper?
I don't think so. I think Ava was probably a more authoritative source on that to answer that question. Ava, I know we had some like lightweight tracking on like what changes were made in the Google Doc, but I don't think anything was exposed in the external PDF.
That's my understanding as well. I used the Google Docs feature of naming versions to save checkpoints every so often, but I have not adopted a formal versioning scheme, and that certainly is not visible in the published versions.
So you can see we referenced the outreach white paper here as reference number 1. All we've done so far is apply the month to it, and so we can, I don't know if you have a new version for this one, we can update July to October or whatever, but if you have any other version numbering scheme, we want to update our own reference here.
I would, it seems quite reasonable for the publication of this, or the published versions, to begin having a version tag. And we can track that in the doc itself, but you know, start from where we are.
So what I might recommend is, right, we put a specific version number when we actually go to a publication event. You know, for example, for us, for the Open Source Summit, call that version X. And then when we have within the TAC a goal for another version change externally, that we then, in addition to bumping the version number, either here in the doc have a summary of what changed as a section within the doc. One way to do that. Alternatively, we have a separate publication that is for each version, here's the short description of what changed, and that's sort of a corresponding amendum doc.
I just realized we don't have a title on this document.
I need to correct myself. We do have official version numbers in the Outreach Committee's paper. Yep.
And
V1.0 was published June 29th, according to the table, and then V1.1 is still in review.
Okay, so the one we would want to reference is going to be something like
V1.0, because that was the July version.
Right, but for the OSS, you guys are going to have a new version, which is 1.1. And it may have a new
question. We have not set a target date for publishing that.
Okay, gotcha. And since the link is in here too, and this is actually the June one, not July, right? It should look like this is what you're saying.
Wait, we published an update, the update with blockchain.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was that the 1.1?
I don't know if that was version. That's the.
Okay, so we can take this offline, but the point is we want to make sure this and the URL all match when we reference the Outreach white paper.
Yep, and Outreach Committee will want to make sure that when we are publishing things, that the version is visible in the published form.
Yeah. And so whatever format that you're using, like if you're putting it into the end of the title or something, then we should try to match the same format.
Seth, could you take that as an action item for the next outreach meeting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Should we have a more canonical URL for the white papers that doesn't have like a conference name in it or something?
Yeah, we did change that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can update that on this document.
There's also a short link. Stefano, is the short link of the type that we can change the target?
Yes, the short link can be redirected.
Okay.
The PDF link cannot. So you can't redirect a specific file, but you can redirect a URL without a file in the path.
Great. So I think we should have, this is more the outreach side, but will apply also to the TAC white paper. So I'll mention it here. I think we should have the version numbers and the canonical file names with a short link that then moves to latest version. And I think that should apply to both white papers.
So you saw, here's the title that the Outreach white paper has, unless it's changed or whatever, at least when I snapshotted it at the beginning of this document, origin, that was the name. But we don't have a name. I just realized during the call here.
Yeah, that came up during the outreach one also. At the last minute, I had to like go around and agree on a name, on a title.
So here, but we need a title that distinguishes it from the Outreach white paper.
Yes,
so it can't be this one, right? And so what would we do? Because we need to send something to Linux Foundation, so we can keep editing it up until like next week sometime. Because this is a wordsmithing change if we change the title, but we need to have a placeholder title that we send them now. So any suggestions for a title here to distinguish it from the Outreach one? I'm just having a placeholder. If somebody has specific words and stuff, feel free.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that either the phrase in-depth or technical ends up in the title, so that's good.
Yeah.
Maybe like deep dive or technical, something like that, just to indicate the differentiation.
Well, it's a placeholder. Please think about it and see if people can come up with a better suggestions, and we can put that in email, I guess, or in comments in the document if you have suggestions. If you think about it even during the meeting, feel free to do edits. So somewhere there it is. Okay. All right. Any other general comments, or should we go through looking at any of the outstanding comments in the document?
As far as the publishing the different versions, then later on, do we want to put a versioning section in the document that when we do revise the version summarizes what changed? Because all the internal Google Docs revision tracking would only be visible to us and editors of the document. Or would we prefer to put it as a separate sheet that's linked to here, that the separate sheet tracks and describes the general description of the changes for each version?
So Ava, is there anything that's like this or something similar in the actual updated outreach white paper?
A timeline of changes, yes. If you open the outreach white paper, it is at the very top. Or I can share my screen and show you if it's interesting.
Is it in the link that's
no, it is not in the published form. It is only there for tracking in our
okay, no, yeah, the question was in the published form.
No, there is not yet.
Okay, so I would say we should do whatever outreach does with the outreach white paper, because it's not, I would claim that it's less important for the very first version and more important for the second version.
So far, our plan has not been to include a timeline of changes in the published version, but just to have different copies of the file with each change.
Okay.
We could, of course, change that.
So who brought this up? Was it Brandon?
Yes.
Do you have any strong opinions on this matter, or are you fine with it not being in there? What do you think? Because really, this is also a question on outreach. So. Yeah.
I was going to try to find an example of where I've seen both ways to track that and just to show those. So give me just a minute, see if I can find that.
Okay. I'll go on to a different topic and then jump in as soon as you have it. There's still the comment on the document that I called out. This was the Thomas Harjono comment, and you can see this paper provides more details for a technical audience. And we said it would be nice to expand that with more to say, but I couldn't think of what more we should say. And so if somebody else wants to take a shot, feel free, but otherwise, by default, it's going to go out with just this, similar to how outreaches didn't have more details. But at least we say that one sentence, which is pretty slim. Here, I added in a reference to the outreach white paper. You can see this is why is it necessary. This is where the, sorry, this is not the reference to the outreach white paper. This is the reference to the scoping document, okay? We said, and so I'm going to tee up something that came up in the outreach meeting yesterday. This is the prerequisite discussion here. With the goal of decreasing reliance on proprietary software, blah, 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 the CCC has excluded from its scope, right? TEs that have only software to trust, and that notion of the CCC scope, I said, is the right place to reference the scoping document. So another confidential computing consortium white paper provides more discussion of the CCC scope. The topic that came up at the outreach meeting is that this document right now is a markdown. And the suggestion in outreach, and I think the suggestion was from Ava, was to take the scoping document and convert the scoping document to another PDF. And so what do people think about sending that document also to the LF to create into a PDF format? And here, if we do that, this would be the updated version that is the current state version, not what's already merged. And so the PR62 version. So what do people think about having this one be in PDF format, our scoping document? Any comments? I hear silence because the scoping document is what we pointed like the analyst to. It was in our analyst briefing deck. Presumably it might be in future decks as we have future things. And so since it was a suggestion from Outreach, I think it's a good idea. Once this PR is merged, then it seems like we haven't touched that content other than the tense change here in 62. That it seems like it would be a good thing to have be more in the format of our white papers. And so I would like to propose that we actually go ahead and send this one to the LF Foundation also, tomorrow or whatever, to say, can you also do a pass on this one?
Okay.
I heard an okay. Anybody have concerns with that? Otherwise, it seems like it's just straightforward. It's not a technical decision. We can just do it, right? Any objections? Okay. Thanks for speaking up. So nice to have somebody say sounds good. So.
Well, I apologize, Dave. I've only just joined, so I sort of like walked into that conversation. But
yeah, no, we knew you were going to be late, so we had the heads up. So and similarly, has Demetrios joined us? I know Demetrios was also going to be joining us around now sometime too. Yeah, thank you, Demetrios. Looks like he's in the process of joining right now.
So I'm looking at the list of folks that are on the call. I don't know how many of them were involved in actually drafting the scoping document, since that was very, very early, and we've had lots of new members since then. So there may not be total familiarity with that document.
So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug reviewing the pull request 62. This pull request has been sitting around for like a month or so. I know Mike originally did a pass, pointed out some typos, which have been fixed several weeks ago, before the last meeting. But I need other people to approve it so that we can merge it in our GitHub process. I would love for that to happen by tomorrow. And so if you haven't already, if you were not around at the time that we did the scoping document, now would be a great time to read through it because we need somebody to approve it. So.
It's also linked to from the public website.
Yes. That was, so if you haven't seen it, it's like
it's under about scope.
Yeah. I'm just going to show that here. Confidential. Okay. So here, if you look at about, and you can see scope, and so this will link to it here, and you can see this is the old version, meaning not the version that's been open for pull request, because this is all future tense. The TAC recommends that it be, and so on. So this is all future tense. The pull request 62, if you haven't seen it, let's see, these links here is this one. Pull request 62, you can see this has been open since August 19th. And so I'm just going to go to the files change view briefly here. And you can see, missing the last change that I made. Let's see, files changed. Yeah, you can see the confidential computing consortium scope to try to match the label on the website. And instead of things like it recommends that it be, the scope is, and so on. So that's the style of changes throughout. Okay. It's just changing the tense to be current tense instead of future tense. And so please review that and approve. I would really like 2 people to mark it as approved before tomorrow. Before end of day tomorrow.
Okay. I'll add on to the list of things to do tonight.
Cool. All right, so that's the document that pull request version is what I would propose sending to the Linux Foundation by end of day tomorrow, assuming that I get 2 approvals besides myself. But I can really only do that once I have 2 approvals besides myself. Okay, trying to find, going back to the TAC white paper. Here it is. Okay.
And Dave, on the previous topic then about finding examples of version tracking within the doc versus separate doc. In the chat, I pasted in an example of each. These are just ones that I could think of offhand, top of my head, been involved in. They may not be the best examples, but there's an example then of what each one looks like in the published doc.
Okay. Trying to pull those up. So here's the first one. Where should I be looking?
Yeah. It is page number 9 in the doc.
Page 9. Okay. Oh, right there. Change log. Okay. Here.
Yes, right there. So it shows the published version when it was published, what section numbers had changed, and a brief just description of why or what changed within that section.
Yep.
And then the second doc is an example of publishing a separate sheet as an errata of what needs to change from the main doc. And with a note, if you scroll down to the introduction, so the earlier page, so page 3 within the document.
Okay. Yep.
It just mentions that second sentence, the information in this document is likely, but not certain to be incorporated into a future version of the main specification doc. So it's sort of a heads up, here's the change that we think needs to be made, and it may or may not be actually finally incorporated back into the main doc. So just 2 examples of ways that we could do this.
Okay. I think like the Microsoft Protocol Document Series uses an approach very similar to this. IETF RFCs sometimes have an appendix that has this, but not always. Other times they'll just be the new version and not mention what was changed. It just depends on whether there's demand for that. And so I think there's lots of different precedents and different ways of doing it. So I guess I would like to refer the discussion of this to the outreach committee because they're the ones that are on the second version of a document to make a recommendation.
Okay, we can add it to our agenda for next week.
Yeah, meaning this is not a request to add the change log. This is a request to make a decision as to whether to add a change log or some other approach or whatever.
Okay.
Because I'm not hearing any explicit request from the TAC to do it a particular way. Just the question is raised, and we would like outreach's advice in answering it because we would like to go along with whatever outreach does, and outreach is one step farther along being in the second version, and so you guys have to deal with it first, whatever it is. So
I can see value in having a change log. We just hadn't considered it so far.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to propose that for the first version, unless we get an answer before OSS, that the first version of the TAC white paper will not have any such thing, because even if there was, it would only have 1 row in it, and so it's not terribly interesting. And so I'm going to propose we just defer that to the second time. Whatever the answer is, we would handle it in the second rev of the TAC white paper.
Yeah, you can just follow put the date or whatever in the title page for now. And then,
yeah, I'm going to expect that the LF edit pass will make it look like the outreach's white paper in terms of the format. Wherever the version goes, wherever the date goes, they'll put it in the same format.
Also, when you send it to LF, can you ask them to do a different, like a visually different title page? So it's, like a different color or background.
Yeah, we can do that. We could also give them examples. So if there's a document style we want to mimic for the TAC, since I'm guessing they do a lot of marketing-based white papers, this sort of technical white paper is probably something they don't do a ton of. So if we wanted to hand them a couple examples and say, style it like this, they could make the title page different and make us look very much in line with other technical documents.
Yeah, the last time we did the layout for the outreach paper, it came back like super, like overly marketing, like too much white space on the page. It looked like a brochure almost. So I would give them some direction on how you want it to look. Like an example one would be good.
Stefano, do you have an example of a technical white paper from some other LF organization?
Not on hand. I can certainly dig that up.
Okay.
And
Because I mean, it's similar to, I guess, when Outreach did a discussion of, logos and things, right? LF had supplied, here's, 6 of them, and then you guys voted on saying, well, I like A, I like B, or whatever, and then you pick one, right?
Correct. Yeah, let me dig up some other LF technical, and then actually just if folks want to send to the mailing list any technical papers that they would like ours to look like, the team would be very happy to have those as examples to base their artwork off of.
Mm-hmm.
I should also note, and I'll drop it into chat, that this would be a great opportunity for us to vote on the Venn diagram, because I did not get a lot of responses to that one. So that is in chat. I have labeled those, and if we can come to a conclusion on that one, that would definitely make life easier for us.
Okay.
I remember last time we had a combination of, I'd like it a little like A and like E. So if we're going to do that, that's great. But if I can get those changes to them today, that'd make their lives easier next week.
Okay. I will leave this up on the screen as people glance at them for a minute. Some people may not have seen this before. I think
one of the things I would call out is that the shading may imply things. And so we want to be sure that we pick the one with the shading that we feel implies the thing we like. So for example, on C, I might say something like, okay, so hardware TEs and software TEs look similar, but TPMs and programmability look like they're similar. And that might not be true.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, Pete, impressions? This one's the beauty contest, right? So
there's also colors, right? So, I mean, I think the concept of the Venn diagram is accurately portrayed here. It's just about how different do we want to call out. TEs are different than privacy preserving computation. And so they really should be red and blue so people clearly see they're different. Or do we like them kind of merged all into one palette like D?
Yeah. So I will point out that when I put the just one observation, because there's a bunch of elements here, because you could look at color, you could look at font size and things. And so as far as the line style, when I put the original diagram together, that's the one that's in the white paper right now, I intentionally used dashed, or in this case dotted lines, because that has a bigger connotation that line is a little bit fuzzy rather than solid. And so you can see like A, D, and E use the dotted line style, as opposed to the other ones which use a solid line or a shading style, which makes it look like the boundary is more precise. And so as far as line style goes, my preference is, A, D, or E, because that was an explicit choice in my intent to go along with that disclaimer about boundaries are often fuzzy.
Dave, a question for you, since you put it together. Is the TPM circle intentionally touching the virtual software TE circle? Is there semantic meaning in the touch but not overlap?
I'm just trying to find the TAC white paper here. Where is it?
That was the only circle on the diagram that was touching but not overlapping. Yes, it's there too.
Okay. No, to answer your question, I was just looking to see if it was actually touching. There's nothing having to do with it touching. It could be not touching. So I don't think that matters either way to me. There's no hidden intent. The only intent you can see was the dashed where there's holes in these lines to say, well, maybe this line isn't really solid. That was the connotation.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to flip back and forth.
And Dave, I do have a question for you as well.
Yeah, please.
I don't think we ever concluded whether we want to define what is meant by privacy preserving computation. I wrote a whole wall of text the last time we had that discussion.
The TAC white paper does have a sentence. Sorry, the TAC white paper, this one here, has this text here. For example, privacy-preserving computation is variously defined as being synonymous with multi-party computation, or covering both multi-party computation and homomorphic encryption, or even covering the entire space of protecting data in use. And so that's why we don't use it, because there's multiple competing definitions that are completely different.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the way I think that the reasons, the text reads perfectly fine, and I agree with it. The diagram gives the impression that privacy preserving computation consists of only the two in the top, and that TEs could offer something to intersect.
Right. That's why the disclaimer here is important, and why this outer line here, it's really important to me that this line over here is not a solid line, right? Because it's basically taking a middle ground. It says, well, technically it's kind of, if we were to use shading, right, it would be weakly shaded all the way to the entire edge of the diagram, and more darkly shaded right around multi-party computation, and kind of medium shaded around here, right? Because, you know, where do you draw the line kind of spreads outward or inward or whatever. And so that's why we try not to use that particular term, and this is explaining that. But that's why, to me, it's important that this not be a solid line. And so that's why I was arguing for not the style of B, C, or F, which has exactly that problem. Now, you might argue that A, D, and E still have a little bit of that problem too, but at least it's not as bad as B, C, or F. So
that's right. I think in the second version, or in future version, if we do want to delve into this topic a bit more, I'm happy to contribute a bit more text in describing, you know, some of the prevailing views in Europe, certainly, and in a lot of the academic papers where you look at, you know, privacy preserving as rights preserving. That is, you know, how do you project and enforce policies and behaviors on distributed data processing systems? That is one of the interpretations of GDPR. But I think given what we are talking about here as a first white paper, I think it's perfectly fine, and it's a great job. I just wanted to say that I think A, B, and C are preferable in my view, because it gives that overlapping to say that enclave-based computations does and should be part of the privacy-preserving computation offering.
And we do list multi-party computation as one of the seven use cases in the outreach white paper.
yeah.
So that was my comment.
Okay. So between these, we've talked about line styles. Stefano pointed out whether, you know, shading match is an issue. Anybody else have comments or preferences between these six? I mean, because you can also mix and match. Say, I like the line style of, you know, one with the font and color or something of another one. So it sounds like, Michael, you said you liked A, B, and C. Did I hear that right?
In the sense that it gives the it gives the impression, and as intended, that TE-based computations does intersect and part of.
Okay, I don't follow why A, B, and C have that combination more than D and F, but I don't have a strong preference either. So.
Stefano, I think we looked at this in outreach as well and liked A. Was that correct? Do you remember? I think there was maybe like A or D, something like that.
Yeah,
that does sound familiar.
So
it seems like a lifetime ago.
It does.
Looks like the main difference between A and D is purely color, right? A and D is the difference is color.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to a branding thing in that I don't think the colors are going to imply enough difference between those two subjects.
So Outreach you guys have closer to the marketing view. If you do you use the same diagram in the outreach white paper? I can't remember.
No, it's not in the outreach white paper.
Okay. Do you have an opinion as to if the outreach looked at this before? Did outreach have any preference on?
I think we preferred A.
Okay. All right. Then let's just say among the TAC, is there anybody that would not be okay with A being the one that's used in the first version? Would people want any changes to A? So if I don't hear anything, then we could just, pick that one for this version. All right, I'm not hearing anything. All right, sounds like we're going to pick A for right now.
Sounds good. I'll let them know.
Okay. All right.
I did have one other question in terms of the, we talked about the scoping document. Did we agree that we're going to send that to LF Creative as well, or is that going to stay as a document in Markdown?
I propose that, again, this was a suggestion to the TAC from Outreach, right? And so I propose that we accept Outreach's request to convert it to PDF. Does anybody object?
No.
Okay, then we're going to do that, but that's gated on 2 other people approving by tomorrow.
Excellent. Okay. Just want to make sure. And we're just converting that to a PDF. We're not
Correct.
turning this into a white paper. Yeah. Okay. That was the part I wanted to make sure I was clear on.
Well, eventually it would be nice for it to be in whatever the format we're going to use for TAC white papers, for it to be in the same format. So all the
Sure.
same discussions of styling, if there's some template that we're going to use, we should probably use the same template for both of them.
Sounds good.
But whether they can do that within the same time frame or not, I don't know. But
right. Yeah, but long term, that's what we're looking for. And yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah,
completely doable. Excellent.
and then subject to when they can do it, yeah.
Right. Excellent. Thank you.
Because I think our goal is that that the OSS can point to it, but also I'm expecting the over here when we say learn, there's white papers, right? So this white paper section right now is where you get the outreach white paper, and we'd expect to have another one below here that's the TAC white paper on the same page. Okay, and initially that might have the scoping one too. That might just be linked from inside the second one, but in theory that could also be a third one or something like that if we wanted to do that. Anybody care either way as to whether the scoping document, since you haven't approved it yet, you don't have to have an opinion yet, but eventually I think it might be nice if it was a third one in here, but open to discussion.
Makes sense. It gives good people good context.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go through any other comments here. So thank you, Brandon, for covering the change log stuff. So we talked about that one. Minor wordsmithing, you haven't seen it yet. I pointed this one out in a previous comment. In British English, that and which are synonymous. In American English, there's a subtle distinction. Chicago Manual of Style says when to use which one. And so I did a pass and changed the ones that Chicago Manual of Style would have said to be that, which for the Brits, these things would be synonymous anyway, so the Brits shouldn't care. But I'm just explaining why that is. If you care, read the Chicago Manual of Style discussion. Simon had added a comment down here during the last meeting. Further discussion is provided later in section 7. All I did was I copied that up into the 2 bullets for context. Hopefully that's basically taking Simon's text, putting it here and putting it here. And then here I put in similarly a forward to the threat model section, which is section number 6, since this is talking about the threat model. So this is now a couple of bullets with forward references to section 7, section 6, and the scoping document. Here's the diagram that we were just looking at, and this would be replaced with A. This one, I made a quick text change for consistency with the text before it, since it says it can vary by vendor, model, and algorithm. And so I made it doubly clear here that this was typical examples of homomorphic encryption TPM. Grammar wordsmithing to make it read better. No change in meaning. Feel free to look, but not worth discussing. Different from instead of different to. Yeah, keep going. Nothing worth discussing. Okay. here's the text that Mike filled in as his action item. So I'll leave this up on the screen for a bit, because if you haven't reviewed this, this was Mike filled this in between last meeting and this meeting. And I don't think Mike is on the call yet. Dimitrios is, but since Mike authored it, let's look at his text here. Make sure we're all okay with this. Protocol attacks. Leaving up here in case somebody wants to call something out. I think I read through it and it looked okay with me. I'm gonna scroll up just a little bit. Okay. I'll give it another 10, 15 seconds in case something jumps out to somebody here. Tell me to slow down if you want me to, but I also want to pull up just the next little bit here, the basic supply chain attack. So I'm going to scroll up to see if nope, I can't get cryptographic attacks not on the screen at the same time. 3 sentences.
Yeah, I think that the section looks good, in particular calling out the principle of crypto agility. It's good.
And this is all things we had discussion of during the meeting last time, and so Mike tried to capture it in text, some of it which was in comments that have now been clicked as addressed, and so there were notes in the comments that he put into text. Same thing with this one. We had discussion in the meeting last time that he's tried to capture in the text rather than just in the comments here. Okay. If somebody sees anything here, I'm going to keep scrolling. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Autoscope, there was no change here. This is where we were having that discussion. The comment was just talked about the sophisticated ones, but the basic ones were missing, and so that's what this section here was. So there was no changes to the sophisticated parts. Trivial wordsmithing, feel free to check, but grammar, punctuation. Okay, Simon, this is your comment that was done. Oh, where'd it go? It said add a sentence saying where it came from. I'm trying to find where that just went. It's at the top of the attestation section. That's where it was. Okay, here we go. Yeah, add a sentence saying where the terms came from. That was this line up here. I didn't like having an empty section here, so I took the hardware-based attestation label, moved it down right above the hardware-based schemes, because this paragraph right here would apply to all attestation schemes, even the ones that are not hardware-based, so now it's not an empty section. So,
okay.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, okay.
Yeah, great. Sorry, that's done. Okay. This is when I said I did my second pass to the attestation section to make sure that it reads as generic. I took out this phrase because those terms challenge, attest, and verify were not actually used anywhere below, so it was not necessary to call that out. The sentence still reads fine without that phrase.
Sure.
This one, I already said signs the attestation data. So using a digital signature scheme was kind of redundant, so just trying to increase readability by removing extra stuff. The term in the RATS architecture is reference values and not reference states, and I believe the term reference values from the IETF actually came from either TCG or FIDO. So that's the more commonly used term across the industry, and so.
Well, hang on a second, Dave. You seem to have a hanging sentence there in the next paragraph down, right? So the last sentence for a longer discussion, including other variations, C, and then you've deleted it.
It says C4.
Oh, just C4.
Okay. Yeah, because the long version here, I pulled the long version up to the top of the section here. So we have the full name with the citation number after it. And so we could still repeat it if you like that style better. But rather than repeating the long version, it's now just bracket 4. Again, I was looking for redundant things to reduce text to make it, without loss of meaning or clarity, just make it be shorter. But if you want it kept in there, we could reject. So
no, that's fine.
Okay, but this one is just a tense change. We can, if somebody has something. Anonymity. I pulled this one up earlier in the meeting, where I said the goal was, last meeting we talked about shortening it to 1 paragraph, or approximately 1 paragraph, which is this text here. So we kind of already looked at this earlier in the meeting. I kept the reference to ISO IEC as the example. That was the one that was here. in the long version and the full details out of that one. And so we no longer need a reference for link because the reference is basically, whoops, that ISO document. Where that went, okay, there. TCB, okay, so the other discussion we had last time was about the labels on these sections here. So remember, this one was attestation. This is the original text, right? Attestation and TCB recovery. And the discussion we had last time was whether we should rename those to be attestability and recoverability. And that's where this text came in. That was the suggestion from last time that we talked about. And so I made a proposal back then that says I wasn't convinced, even though I made that suggestion, I wasn't convinced that that was a good idea. And so I've rejected my own change. And unless somebody wants me to change it back, I kept it back as the original that we had before last meeting, meaning there was a suggested change that was here. This was crossed out with the recoverability. That was the changes that we saw last time, and I rejected that change. And so that means that Simon's addition, which I accepted the rest of his addition, I've then pulled this part out, which was Simon, your intent to capture the change up there if we did that. And so I just deleted this part and left the rest of your text. And I forget what the comment was, but I added the sentence here. And so since Simon, this is your text, I want you to specifically review this, but everybody else too. But since I was editing your text, please check all the green stuff here. And so I was trying to tie TCB recovery to the attestation section, given that this is a sub-bullet here. It's now section, well, it always was underneath there. And so the point was, one of the times when you do TCB recovery is, let's say the verifier's policy changes, right? The verifier's policy changes because the TCB that you have is no longer considered compliant, right? You haven't made any changes, but now the verifier has said, well, I don't trust that thing anymore. And so that is one of the cases where you'd want to go through TCB recovery, right? It's not the only case, but that's why it's a for example. And that just allows me to tie it.
I might have put the word fully in front of trustworthy after verifier concluding that the attester is not fully trustworthy.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Done?
Yep.
Okay, so you're okay with those suggested edits then? Okay, I'm going to accept the suggestions here. Okay, and then this one is because this is the first section that actually uses the term TCB in the document.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the earlier parts of the document, we talked about hardware and software and so on. And so, whoops, somehow the T got deleted here. And so I tried to tie the definition of TEE to say, it includes both immutable hardware and mutable firmware. And then the recovery is to allow the mutable portions to be updated as secured by the immutable hardware portion, is my proposed phrasing. Feel free to wordsmith.
Well, if you're an FPGA, not all hardware is immutable, I should say. So you might.
Yeah.
You've equated immutable with hardware and mutable with firmware software.
Yep, you got a better phrase?
Yeah, I'm rapidly trying to think.
Okay. Yeah, this is the style of wordsmithing that we can continue to do even through the middle of next week if we need to. But I wanted to call this to your attention because if you got a better way to phrase it that's more technically correct, we can fix it. So.
Simon, Dave, can I suggest something?
Yeah, please.
The way I tend to do these things is to say that in the event of a compromise of a TCB, if there is another root of trust which is not compromised by the same attack and can prove its authenticity and immutability, then you can bootstrap the update of the compromised TCB through the other uncompromised root of trust.
That sounds great to me. Would you like to type that in?
No. No, so I'm doing this for another forum. So I literally was just and that's for tomorrow. So I'm doing that for tomorrow.
So otherwise, this meeting is recorded, right? So we can always go back and replay your words. So, Simon, would you be okay with that approach of describing it like Michael just said?
Well, that's telling you a method by which you're achieving what it said here, right?
It's like a second example, right? If you're compromised, which is often what you mean by recovery, is recovering after a compromise, right? So.
Right. So TCB recovery is about the process of reestablishing that you have trustworthiness, right? By saying the TCB is up to date. What the way Michael described it was a process by which you could achieve that.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to distinguish between what it is you're trying to achieve versus how you achieve it. I agree with Michael. That is a way of achieving recovery.
So down in here, I think this is the part that's showing that because it's may include. That means it's like I read this as being an example. May include special techniques too.
Yeah.
And I consider that as being an amendment for how you would do this, but it would because your first comment, Simon, was the problem with this phrase up here, right? And in Michael's phrasing, he didn't actually use the term hardware or firmware, right? And so maybe there's some way of addressing this one using language that happened to be in Michael's description of the example. Okay,
well,
so
you could just take out in that second part, right? You could just take out immutable. Sorry, you can take out hardware and leave immutable in there. That's fine. That works.
If we're going to get pedantic, the fact that it's immutable doesn't mean that it's not compromised nor trusted.
I agree.
Well, if your immutable part of your TCB is broken, you have a broken device.
Yeah, you can throw it out. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So I think the changes that I just made on the screen addressed originally Simon's point.
Yeah.
Michael's point may have additional text or example or something to put into here.
I think as an example that's perfectly valid. Yes.
So Michael, is there anything in this now that you think is broken enough that we need to fix it before the first version? Because otherwise, if we can get in something that matches your text, your verbal, if we can get some text that matches your verbal stuff in the first version, great. If not, we can defer it to the second version. And the question is, are you okay with that?
So I think I'm okay with that. So I just like to give two examples just to illustrate what I mean. So a typical secure boot process, I mean, you have got a bootloader level 1, level 2, and you typically have got a public hash of a signing private key. So that bit kind of matches what we are talking about here. You could also have a separate, processing element that is tamper resistant to a very high level of physical attack. And generally speaking, if the TCB is not compromised by this sort of physical attack, you could assume and you can check that it is still there with which to bootstrap other things. So I think I'm okay with this paragraph in the sense that I understand what you're trying to say, but it just feels lacking in terms of it feels lacking in terms of a descriptive sense of what it's trying to achieve, unless you already understand the process.
Oh, it tells you what you're trying to achieve right at the very top, right? The first paragraph tells you what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, so if we agree that this, in theory, is good enough. I mean, I can listen to the transcript, see if I can propose any language from what Michael said out loud that would go down in here. But if we can't get agreement on it by next week, it sounds like we're okay with V1 going out with the text as is, and then continuing to improve it after that point as needed.
I think that's fine,
Okay.
Dave.
Okay, because I'm trying to keep moving us along here so that we can get this out while still not trying to cut off any actual discussion that would make it be better. So,
Sure.
So I'm going to go down to the conclusion section, which last time this was a to-do. And so I looked at the outreaches, the outreach white paper's conclusion, and then I tried to write this to say, what do we think the main points we're trying to make in this document is? But since this is all brand new text, if you think that it's making the wrong points, the wrong summary, please feel free. But this is, you might say that the conclusion might be one of the more important sections if you try to summarize it like in an abstract, which we don't have, but the conclusion is the closest thing we have to an abstract. So please pick on this text here. And this is the last thing for us to cover on the TAC white paper during this meeting here. So.
The last sentence feels a little bit sort of like
Which one?
the confidential community is optimistic.
Yeah, that's actually an exact copy of the last sentence in the outreach white paper. So.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I am happy to delete that, but I actually started from the, I pasted in the outreach white paper and then started deleting sentences and replacing one, and that one is still unchanged. So.
It just feels like it's something out of an SEC filing.
Okay, how you like that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Remember that outreach has a different audience than we do, and so maybe it's fine for a different audience. So.
Yeah.
All right. Feel free to add any comments and stuff, but I at least wanted to show it on the screen here in case somebody had major angst about that text. So, all right. So that's the bottom of this. There's the copy graveyard, other references and things. And so I'm going to go on to the next topic. But again, the request is, feel free to keep doing wordsmithing changes as long as you have suggested text on here. My expectation is that all the change diffs in the document right now, I will accept after the meeting, and so that we can see any other change deltas posted after this. And the intent is, unless there's any objections, to send it to LF by end of day tomorrow. So if there's other wording suggestions that are trivial, that those might be fine in the copy that goes to tomorrow.
I think the only thing that might be missing from the conclusion is about the tie back to new use cases that this enables.
Okay. Do you want to take an action item to insert a phrase or sentence?
Sure.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to flip back to the deck unless there's any other points on that, because the next steps I think are clear, although we still have to have a discussion about when our next meeting is to line up stuff, and I'll have that on another slide coming up. So I do want to allow a couple minutes to talk about this. So some of this has overlapped with discussions we've already had in this meeting. We started having this discussion last time, but I wanted to keep having time to continue this discussion here. And so we talked about what are the areas of focus, what are the things that we want to spend more time on over the next year that we perhaps have not had time or not had focus on this year, at least so far, or at least had not had enough and so on. So what are our big areas of focus going forward? And so we've identified about 4 different areas that we think would be good to have more focus on going forward. So the first one is the one that's the cross-product coordination and communication. And so in some sense, the SIG attestation discussion from Brandon fits into this category. But we haven't concluded the discussion of the cross-project chat. That was the one that, if I remember right, Stefano, the vote discussion was about setting that up, which was not just around the Slack for the OSS, but about cross-project chat between projects.
Correct.
Is there any more that people want to bring up on that one? So that one is kind of in progress, but we would like that to proceed. And this is one that I've heard, I don't know, either requests or complaints or desires for better communication, or at least faster communication. This is an area that we, the TAC, can facilitate. So this is one that I think we want to keep encouraging and keep enabling projects to make faster progress in terms of inter-project coordination and coordination outside the projects. Second area is cross-org coordination, and so this is where things like the CNCF discussion that Ava had fits under here. That's why I was asking questions about what type of relationship do we want to have? Is it just informal or whatever? Because in the open source organizations, the answer might be completely different from the standards orgs, which might be completely different from the way that you interact with, say, government agencies. On the government agencies point, just a brief point there. I mentioned back when we had the face-to-face meeting at, I guess it was RSA or whatever, when we all met there, that I've been in conversations with NIST, and that was because Microsoft had provided feedback on NIST's cybersecurity baseline document. I forget what the actual title is. It's the one that's on consumer IoT devices. And so since we were all there at RSA, NIST had arranged a feedback meeting with Microsoft to go over Microsoft's feedback. And as part of that, after I introduced that I was on the CCC, they said, so tell me more about the CCC thing. And so I took that as an opportunity to do a little pitch about the CCC at the end of their meeting. NIST is having a workshop on the 22nd about that cybersecurity baselines document, and invited me to be one of the panelists. And so I'm planning on doing that. And I'm hoping to slip in a plug or two here or there for the CCC. So just full visibility. I am a panelist there on the 22nd. People are welcome to attend. I'll basically be representing myself or whatever, but I do hope to plug the CCC at an appropriate point, because one of the pieces of feedback that we Microsoft had was to don't forget protection of data and use, talk about hardware roots of trust and so on, and it actually does so. And so I hope to be an advocate on the panel. Other areas that we've heard about, you can see all the other standards orgs and things there. This is one that I think we need to have a longer discussion than we can have today about what are the ones that we want to interact with and how do we want to track that, and so on. So this is where I think this is an area of focus that we want to be able to set up more communication. We've had communication with most of the things on that whole slide here, often informally, as we mentioned. Ava informally with CNCF, me informally with NIST, and a couple of us with IETF or Global Platform or TCG or FIDO. Homomorphic encryption, I kind of did so on behalf of the TAC when they invited me as the TAC chair to come and present to them, and so on. So this is another area that I would love people's input as to how do we organize the work around coordinating with these other bodies? Are there other things in the dots that are also equally or more important than the ones that are on there, and so on. Happy to take any thoughts there on the list or in future meeting topics or volunteers to present stuff, whatever. We've been spending a bunch of our time now on the white paper and potentially the scoping document, and so there's desires to have additional collateral, whether it's additional white papers, whether it's pre-prepared talks like we have the analyst briefing deck. There's the terminology effort that Mike and Ava are trying to kick off for us. So there's other things that we can do as technical collateral or talks and things. And then the last one, I don't remember who suggested it, but we put this on during the last meeting, is a notion that maybe we should start having demos and tech talks on other topics to inform tech members, not just about things that are already in the CCC, but about things that are external being presented into us that would be good for all of us to understand. Any thoughts on that topic or volunteers to take an action item? I think we want to put together sort of like a work plan of some sort. I don't know if we want to have different volunteers for different things. So for example, a volunteer to be a informal liaison to CNCF would be different from a person taking an action item to say, forward information from, trusted firmware or IETF or home encryption or whatever else, versus organizing tech talks. I mean, we kind of did the tech talk stuff when I was on the IAB. We had a very similar series where the IAB met weekly. And so 1 out of every 4 meetings, in that case, it was I think usually the first week of the month or whatever, they would have a tech talk where somebody, often not on the IAB, although there were 1 or 2 where somebody was on the IAB, would come in and present a particular topic to the IAB that was for the IAB to learn about and perhaps give guidance, or at least be informed to give guidance to other people about. And so I, as an IAB member, found that very valuable. And so that's why I like this idea, whoever brought it up, because I've been through this. I think it worked very well in that context. And I might hope that it might work well in this context. It would need some suggestions as to how we might manage such a talk series, or what types of talks we want to have, or suggestions for talks or demos, right? It doesn't have to be a talk per se, it could be a demo. And so I want people to think about that. I have thoughts, but my thoughts are biased by how the IAB did it, and I'm happy to share that. But if other people have alternative models or whatever, we don't have to do it the way that the IAB did it. Let's do it the way that works for us. So I just have one comparable. So. Okay. Hearing no comments, I'm going to keep going on, but I'm going to keep bringing these things up and make sure that these 4 areas are covered by agenda topics or whole meetings or whatever as the case may be if we need to. So,
has on the additional white papers, does the outreach team have any needs that we need to satisfy?
I think Seth already dropped off. Ava, are you still on, or is there anybody else from outreach that's still on? I think Seth and Ava have both dropped. So I don't know of any. Yeah, Seth and Ava both already dropped, and so.
Yeah, so Steve's here, and I attend most of them. There has been no discussion for something new. Just to answer the simplest question there.
Yeah. So not yet, I think, is the answer. And I've been to most of the outreach meetings too. I think Stephen has been to a couple more than I have. I haven't made all of them, but I've made most of them. Good question, though.
I think for open source orgs, Open Compute might be an interesting one to go and talk to.
Which one?
Open Compute.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
That's OCP, Open Compute Project.
Yeah.
That'll make it easier to find.
Thank you.
And then I've suggested a 5th area of focus on the mail-in list shortly before this meeting. So it's probably not a good time to talk about it now, but
yeah,
for discussion.
What was it?
It was community development, and in particular, incorporating diversity, stability, and inclusivity.
That was a DCI mail. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay, good topics for future meetings and future meeting agenda points. All right. Our usual reminder, please review. We have 2 open GitHub pull requests. One has already been approved by 2 TAC members, which means the time bomb label is ticking. That expires October 21st. And it gets merged once it's been open for a week after the time bomb. I mean, when the time bomb label gets added, when 2 TAC members, potentially including the author, if the author is a TAC member, approve and nobody's requested changes, then the time bomb label gets added, and that it lasts for a week, and so that's October 21st. It can be merged as soon as it's been open for a week, and a 3rd TAC member approves, or when the time bomb expires. So that means if a 3rd person approves, it gets merged now. If nothing else happens, it gets merged on the 21st. 62 is the one that I keep poking that says I need 2 people to review it, ideally before end of day tomorrow, and mark it as approved, so we can kick that one off to the Linux Foundation's PDF conversion process. And then if somebody, probably the next issue we need to make a pull request for is this one about define what a growth plan entails. Just want to highlight that. There's some discussion already in there. There's no pull request yet. And so that one is kind of the next one on deck for generation of a pull request. So with that, the last question is, when should we have our next meeting? Our normal next meeting would be, I believe, right during the Open Source Summit, which is the Thursday, October 29th. And so the question is, when should we have a meeting? Should we skip that one? Should we move that meeting to a different date, whether it's before or after that date, or do something else? What do people think? Do people think that we can be done with the white paper from what you've seen without another meeting between now and the OSS?
Hello. Hello.
I mean, if we just skip it, the next normal TAC meeting would not be for like a month from now, right? It'd be the 12th of November, which is 4 weeks out. Thoughts?
That's a good question. I avoided signing up for the booth because of the TAC meeting.
So you're saying if we don't meet on the 29th, you'll sign up for booth duty. Noted.
Touche. Well, there would be plenty of opportunity for others to sign up for booth duty also.
Oh, yes. I guess you're right. I didn't have that on the agenda. Stefano, do you want to post into the chat the booth sign up page link, if you can find that, Stefano?
Sure, will do.
So please sign up for booth duty. Yes, I should have had that on the agenda, and I didn't realize it until now that it was not on the agenda. There is a spreadsheet that works very much like last time. There are 2 columns. There's one for outreach. There's one for TAC. We would like to have as many TAC people and even project representatives, even if they're not on the TAC, they want to represent, Keystone or Oplum or any of the other ones that we've reviewed, to have them be present. I think, Stefano, you mentioned they're using different booth software than last time. One of the issues or artifacts that we had last time around was that the TAC white paper, the outreach white papers and so on, all the collateral was accessible without somebody actually going into the chat room. As a result, people could answer their questions without going to the chat room, and we hardly had anybody come into the chat rooms. This time there's different booth software. I don't know how it's going to work. I think, Stefano, you were trying to investigate. We probably don't know the answer yet.
No, not yet, but we should know soon.
Yeah. So, but we do want people to sign up on that spreadsheet for time. It can be other people from your, whether it's the TAC rep or, the backup person or someone that's familiar with a project that you're the mentor for. That's why there's a column 3 in case we have, outreach, TAC, and the project person. That's perfectly fine. We don't know how much traffic we're going to have in the chat rooms yet, so we're just trying to be prepared.
Can I make 2 observations?
Yes.
So observation number 1, however the schedule is decided, starting on the half hour seems to cluster two meeting slots in an hourly organized calendar. Right, if you start on the half hour, basically you've got to have a 2-hour block free, right? If your company tends to organize meetings on the hour, every hour.
Yeah, I did think about that. My thought was that it would be nice to give us a break between our meetings since we tend not to get those and they're just rapid fire. But yeah, if that is an issue, I would say just sign up and make as much of that time slot as you can. Okay. I'll be around covering all the entire day. So if you're only able to make it, say at 4 o'clock instead of at 3:45, those 15 minutes I'll be there.
So here I'm noticing, so this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. the open source summit, does that go on onto Thursday? I thought Thursday. I know there are things on Thursday, but it maybe they're the specific breakout special things.
Something is happening. I don't know what, but I do know that these are the booth times I was
Yeah,
given.
there's no booth. Right. There is stuff on Thursday,
So
but there's no booth
thankfully,
times on Thursday.
this is all
Okay.
we have to manage.
So Simon, you're off the hook on having to sign up anything on Thursday. You're fine. So.
Well, you may be able to now hold a meeting on TAC.
Oh no, there are other summits and things going on.
Yeah, I think the security summit is happening.
Correct, the security
yeah.
summit, and so I'm attending. Like, I mean, there's a part of the security summit that day, and so I don't know. I would still encourage other people to be active in the other summits and stuff that are going on as part of the overall event on Thursday.
And so my second observation was for those that are on the West Coast. Although this is in Europe, this is the 1 week of the year when clocks roll back 1 week earlier in Europe than they do in the US. So it's actually a 9-hour time difference, not a 8-hour time difference. Just so people know.
So let me ask, should the TAC actually go ahead and meet on October 29th?
Yes.
Simon says yes. I don't know what's on the agenda because I did not actually check whether I can be there if we meet at the usual time. So I may or may not be able to be there. Jethro, will you be able to be there next on the 29th? Does that cause a problem for you? Is Jethro still on the call?
Oh, I think people are dropping.
Okay, so let's go ahead and call it now. We'll follow up over email, Ben, and try to decide over email.
Okay.
Okay, but it sounds like right now your motion, Simon, is to go ahead and meet that day, and so we will confirm whether people are available, and so that will be the default answer. But I mean, we'll say, do people have problems with that? I'll phrase the question that way. So. All right, thanks all, and thanks to you who stayed 5 minutes after. So.
All right.
Thanks everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.